Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I knew that it would be a full house, so thank you for coming. Really, really thrilled and happy and proud and privileged to be able to have this event here today with these two gentlemen. It really is the culmination of a dream. We've been working on this for a long time. I'm really, really happy that they're here. So first of all, I want to say thanks to Rob and Dan and MP&E for okaying it and buying us lunch and paying for the parking. Sorry, you guys. There's two cars. That's going to be expensive. And also thanks to the technical crew, to Tariq and folks in the studio office who made all this happen. So, you already know this man. This is Kurt Ballou. And Kurt Ballou is the guitar player and he's the guitar player, co-founder of the band Converge that is remarkable in many ways, and I'm going to describe to you. And this is Matthew Ellard. Matthew Ellard is professor in the MP&E department. We're really lucky to have him, so you know him as well. Together, these two guys did something back in 2001, and we're going to talk about what they did. The most important reason why we're here and talking about it is because they did something that's really rare. They accomplished something. Not just making a record. I mean, we make records all the time. We make it every day. But think about it, of all the records that get made, how many are called a masterpiece and really are a masterpiece? Not just by the artist's mother, but I mean, it's really a masterpiece. Not only is it a masterpiece by the critics and by the fans, but it launched a career for them. I think this was your fourth record, and things kind of took off for them after that. They also accomplished something that is nearly impossible. The band formed when they were teenagers, and they're still together. That's nearly impossible. They did something else that's impossible. They do their own artwork. They have established not just an aesthetic for themselves, but an aesthetic with Jake Bannon's work, an aesthetic that has become the de facto standard for heavy hardcore metal records. They are not just the look, but also the sound of hardcore and metal. So they did an art record that is a masterpiece. They've stayed together for years. They're internationally known. And today, they're making art and making music on their terms, the way they want to do it. And they don't have day jobs, and this is what they do. That, my friends, that's the brass ring. That's what we all hope to do. It's the best we can hope to do. It's extremely rare, and you've done it. So we'd like to hear a little bit about how you did it. We also have Matthew here, who had the rare privilege as engineers and producers. You guys are going to know this soon enough. Not all the records you do are great, but every once in a while you get so lucky that you work on something that is great. And so we're going to have Matthew look back and talk about what it was like to work on a record that became great. We're going to ask, did you necessarily know it was great at the time? What were you thinking when you mic'd those drums? What were you thinking when you heard those drums? We'll ask some of those questions. So without further ado, Matthew Ellard, Kurt Ballou, thank you. Let's start with the record. Let's play something. What do you want to play, Matthew?
I don't mind. What's everyone's favourite song on the album?
Distance and Meaning.
Can't keep the whole thing start to finish. Yeah. Okay, we'll play Can't Keep. So we'll start off with the top. Now, Can't. Louder. Yeah, this is crazy because I'm looking at this and like, when we made the record, none of these songs had names. So to me, that first song is the cymbal catch song.
Yeah, there was like a part of that song when I was doing the scratch guitar track where like Ben, our drummer, like he didn't have enough arms or something, so I had to like stop playing guitar and like grab a cymbal in the middle of the tape. And that's happened. There's been like auxiliary cymbal catchers on just about every Converge record.
That's one of my vivid memories. It was because when we did the tracking, it was just drums and Kurt playing, and in this room, and Kurt was playing his guitar, but he was standing a foot away from the drum kit the whole song, and he was like, getting pounded. He looked like he was in pain. He's like, "Quick, grab!" And then he was kind of like holding his ears as he walked out. You know. But anyway, any more or?
We,
Well, maybe we can revisit it later.
Yes. Sure.
yeah, we do want to talk about the specifics of the making of the record, and so we want to go back and forth between the specifics and the big picture. There's so many questions to ask, I hardly know where to begin. But first of all, let me ask you, what was your aim artistically? Did you go in to make these songs thinking, I've got a concept in mind? Or did you kind of do it one song at a time and say, okay, I think we've got enough for an album?
I think my awareness of the things you talk about. Well, I think when you're young, you do things much more instinctually, and as you age, you develop more an awareness for, why you develop certain instincts. And at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of thought given to, we want to make this kind of record with those kind of parts and these sort of songs, and then let's go write it. It was more just, this was the thing that happened naturally as a result of playing music together, and this was. The first album with this lineup, Ben was a new drummer for us at the time, and he really reinvigorated the band and pushed us in kind of a new direction. Nate, our bass player, had played on the previous EP, but this is his first album in the band, and he was a songwriter. Prior to his entrance to the band, I was really the primary songwriter. There wasn't a whole lot of contributions by the other people, and I don't know if that was a result of just my dominance or if it was, a lack of their desire to contribute or what it was. But, the result is that I was the dominant songwriter prior to this record, and then starting this record, I think there became a lot more collaboration within the band, both because there were more creative forces in the band, but there were also, and then we finally had a lineup where we all were sort of one mind, focused to go in a certain direction, and we also had a great respect for each other's abilities and musical tastes. Whereas, prior to that, not that I didn't respect the guys that were in the band prior to that, but we were more of Converge is like a high school band that never broke up. So like when you start a band when you're 17, you pick the guy from math class who plays drums, and like the guy from social studies who owns a bass amp. And that's like that's like your criteria for starting a band, and your ultimate dream is to like play the high school battle of the bands or something like that. And then most people over time, that high school band breaks up, and they start the next band, and it's maybe a little closer to what they want to do. And 3 or 4 bands in, then they found the right group of people to play with. Well, we did that all under the moniker of Converge. So if you listen to like the early Converge stuff, you hear that history of us figuring out how to play and finding the right people. And once we that's why like Jane Doe is really the first Converge record that I'm actually really proud of from start to finish, because we found our voice, and that was a result of the 4 people that are in the band right now finding each other. So really the artistic intent was not about a particular mood or a particular style of song. It was more just about following what the feeling was in the room at the time as we were writing the songs, and how the common ground that the 4 of us had with each other musically and artistically, and just following down that path that was already in front of us to the ultimate final destination.
Did you bring up a really good point that we talk about a lot, that it takes bands and artists a little while to find their style. You start off, nearly all of us do, we start off by imitating somebody else, and then because we're artists, we fail at imitating other people, and our own individual style emerges. Sure. Who did you guys, when you started off, who were you following? I know that by the time you got to this 4th record, you'd found your own voice, but who were your influences? Who were you following when you started?
Well, I mean, the early Converge stuff, we were all, as young teenagers, we were definitely metalheads. We were from Andover, suburban town outside of Boston, and There was no internet at the time, so our window to the outside world was like Thrasher magazine, which had a music review section, and Headbangers Ball 120 minutes. So I knew about all the Bay Area thrash stuff that was on Headbangers Ball, and I loved that. And then I also knew about 120 minutes would have things like Sonic Youth or Pixies or something like that. So there was like this kind of visceral non-metal music that was still like sort of dissonant and interesting, but not coming from the same vocabulary as the thrash stuff that I was into. But then also through Thrasher, I guess we became aware of hardcore and punk and stuff. And I didn't really I don't have any siblings. I didn't have anybody really mentoring me, but some of the other guys in the band had older siblings or older friends who helped mentor them. And so so through skateboarding we got into punk and hardcore, and then I remember realizing that, hey, there's actually hardcore bands in Boston that are doing this stuff that I'm reading about. Maybe I should go check it out. And we started going to shows in Boston and getting involved in the hardcore scene. So like I guess the real early influences that said to us that we can play our instruments, and you can have a band and not have it be as complicated as Iron Maiden. You can play in like a punk band, and it's like the fast track to being able to express yourself, where like there's the energy and aggression is more prized than technical prowess, and so that was as novice musicians, that was really appealing to us. And I've come to learn that there's a lot of incredibly gifted, talented technical musicians within punk. But
yourselves
at the
are no.
time. Well, I mean, I just watched the Filmage, the Descendants documentary, and those guys are just ridiculous players. But so at the time, so we start going to like Boston hardcore shows, and there weren't a lot of touring bands, especially in the hardcore world at the time. So there was a lot of weekend type things. So New York hardcore bands were coming up and playing in Boston all the time. So the Sheer Terrors and Sick of It Alls, and I actually always forget band names, but that kind of the stuff that was big in New York at the time, Cro-Mags and AF and that stuff, is along with like Slapshot and Sam Black Church and the stuff that was kind of big in Boston in the late 80s, early 90s. So we started kind of emulating that stuff, and then I feel like the whole kind of metallic hardcore genre in the 90s really struggled, not just us, but all the compliments you were giving me earlier, I really appreciate that stuff, but I feel like that doesn't just belong to Converge, that belongs to the entire community and all my peers within my little tiny subgenre that were doing that at the time. And I feel like it took basically the duration of the 90s for I guess what I would call metallic hardcore to find a voice. There was a few crossover type bands that were able to nail it, but for the most part, when I listen back on that metallic hardcore made in the 90s, I hear a lot of bands struggling to find an identity, and most of them sort of fell off by the wayside, started other bands, went off and did something else. But bands like Converge and Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, Coalesce, we stuck it out, and I think that by the late 90s, early 2000s, we had found a voice for ourselves.
You guys helped establish that, though. I hear what you're saying about how there's a collection of bands that are doing similar things, and you're looking for who's going to be the leader of this voice and style. But I'd like to read something from, this was a review of Jane Doe, a retrospective review from metalsucks.com. So I'm just going to read a few sentences of what it said there. But they said, the still unmatched excellence of Converge's 2001 masterpiece, Jane Doe, was a precursor to where the metal underground would go in the decade that followed it. And they say here, Jane Doe is still as powerful as it was initially, an unrestrained marriage of savagery and pathos perfectly captured by Matthew Ellard's and guitarist Kurt Ballew's top-notch production. The album hasn't been cheapened by the years that followed. And they go on to say, and this is an important point that I want to get to, of course the album could have been marred by lousy production, lost in muddy obscurity, or the polished-to-death sonics of the big hardcore of the time. Matthew Ellard and Kurt Ballou started a still-going string of perfect-sounding Converge records, with Jane Doe being one of the most accurately sounding albums in metal history. So you did something right, and they're not alone in regarding that. you know that I want to ask questions that ask to what extent did you know what you were doing, and to what extent was it just a happy accident. But can you talk about your sonic and performance criteria for the record? How did you know when it was a good performance? How did you know when it was a good sound?
I'll say, when they came to the studio, I think it was Kurt was and the band were ready to take that next step. You know, you could tell they realized they had a good batch of songs, and they were still a little inexperienced, a little green in that sense of how to make it work. But you could tell there was a swagger about them, and they knew they had something that could really be good. We didn't think it would be as good as it is, but we knew it was a good bunch of songs. This was the first kind of record like this that I'd ever made. So to me, I was a total virgin in that sense. They would play a take, and I would say, "You tell me, was it right or wrong?" It sounded like it was great. He played everything correctly, but I don't know, because it was like 11 of this, 13 of that, 9
Yeah.
or so. It was, so
There's definitely some stuff on there
so
that's needlessly complex.
yeah, but from my point of view, I listen because whenever I work on a band, I've always listened to their previous records, and I listened to their previous records, and they sounded okay, but I knew I can make it sound better. And the person who made them, they were sounded like metal records, and I thought, when I heard the songs they were playing, I said, this is just a big rock record. So I steered away from the metal aspect and made it more into a big rock record.
And I think that was one of the reasons we chose you, is we wanted someone who was more of a versatile professional engineer rather than someone who was specialized in a certain world. And I think we felt like, and I think I've continued to feel this way, that I would rather make a unique sounding record that's maybe not optimal than a record that's like the ultimate version of a particular sound. And so one of our goals in working with you was to make the record that sounded different than our contemporaries.
I always remember one thing, you also in this record, I remember you saying Jake was going to try and sing on this record, and you didn't want to be around when he was singing, so you're doing that part of the record.
I've always had a hard time, like vocals are not my strong suit. Like when I listen to a band, I identify more with the music than I do with the vocals.
Oh, yes.
But and you know, let's be honest, like recording hardcore on tape for vocals is difficult. You know, it's a lot easier to record vocals digitally when you have much more control of how you punch in and stuff. And it was not so much that I didn't want to be around for it, so much as I knew it was going to be difficult, and I didn't want to be running the tape machine.
Everything is, this is all recorded to 2-inch tape as well. This is not Pro Tools. This is before Pro Tools, so it's all 2-inch tape.
Yeah, there's a lot of dumb tricks. Like I do have very specific memories of recording on 2-inch in my studio, recording guitar overdubs by myself and having to play barefoot with my feet up on the tape machine, running the transport with my toes while I played guitar.
Can you talk more about this, of how the sessions went, so that we can kind of picture it? I'd like to hear more about how many days did it take to tracking. We'll get to mixing in a moment, but did you guys all, the basic tracks, was it everybody playing together without Jake, or was it,
No, but
what did you
originally,
overdub?
Well, we ended up recording, well, I can show you, you want to see a budget, which had all the original recording scenarios on it? The options here. So if I go here, you know, the record itself was made for $11,000. Okay, so this is the first budget I sent him. So you see, we were thinking about Q Division Studio A, Q Division Studio B, a combination of Studio A and Studio B, and Fort Apache is still there, and then the Outpost. That guy was just too weird. We didn't go there. So this is how this is the thing. So you can see we have 6 reels of 2-inch.
Oh, look at
tape.
the tape cost.
I know, 6 reels of 2-inch tape, which we made the whole album on.
Wow.
And then
$140 a reel. That's awesome.
we bought it from across the road.
Should've stocked up.
Tape complex used to be a to Haviland Street. And then we had a drum tech, and ended up the actual final budget. Let me get rid of this one. Is this one? That's what we ended up doing. So we did. Well, how many days is that? That's 13 days in the studio. 13 days of recording. This record was made in 13 days. 6 reels of tape, drum tech for 1 day, and then we did 7 days at Q Division. We ended up using Studio A and Studio B at Q Division because Studio A is a big room, Studio B is a small room. So we did the slower songs in the big room, so we could have more ambience, and we did the kind of super up tempo ones in the smaller room because we didn't need the ambience. The tempos are so fast, there's no room for ambience, and to get a different kind of feel as well. And that worked pretty well. And what was the end up? How many did we do in each room? I forget which was.
It's about half and half.
About half and half, yeah.
It's not. It wasn't in reality quite as deliberate as you make it sound, though. It was a lot of the way this record proceeded was just working in the circumstances we had. Ben, our drummer, I don't know why we scheduled this record at the time, but I think he was going through finals while we were recording the record. So he was in and out of the studio a lot. So we'd, record drums when we had him, and then we'd like do a song on guitar. And so there's a lot of different guitar sounds on the record just because we record a song or two at a time. And I think the guitars were recorded both in Q, A, and B. There's a little bit of guitar overdubs at Fort Apache.
Yeah.
There's stuff in my studio. The budget's also not complete because
There's other stuff.
because of the Q Division B room stuff. We were actually in there because James Taylor bumped us from the A room. he came into, I think, paid full rate or something for the A room on some days that we had already booked there at a discounted rate. So we got bumped over to B, and which necessitated an extra day of drum sounds and an extra day of drum tech. But we ended up, taking, and I think that there's a lesson to be learned in that, is that your limitations or the circumstances in which you make a record, you can capitalize on that and use it to your creative advantage. So we decided, like Matthew said, to record the faster stuff in the smaller room, which is a little smaller than this room probably. And
I would say it's about 2/3 of this.
yeah,
room.
and
Same
then
ceiling.
the slower material in the big room ended up, being a blessing for the record, and also the fact that we had to record the guitar sort of piecemeal. We were able to really give each song its own character.
And when we did the tracking, it was just Kurt and drums.
Yeah, the basic tracking. Yeah, there's only one song that was recorded live, which was "Hell to Pay," I think, and we did that one. Yeah, we wanted the amps bleeding into the room mics for that, so we did that one live.
Yeah,
And then I remember we overdubbed a second bass on that record. On that song, that song actually has stereo bass.
Oh. Now, the bass sound on that particular song is amazing. It's
Well, here's something, if you want to see some of
That's
these
stereo
are
bass.
my original notes that I was taking while we were recording. I'm sure if you can see that. You can see all the names. These are the master reels. We recorded on 6 reels, and then when we got masters, I would chop them off and assemble a master reel. So the master reels just have all the master takes on it. It doesn't mean we got everything in one take here. But these are where I've compiled them too. So there's Nate's newest song, which I have no idea what that turned into. What was that one?
That was probably "Heaven in Her Arms."
Well, Heaven is the next
That's
one
my
down here.
favorite.
So.
Oh, okay, then maybe that was, it might have been "The Broken Vow." Those are the two that he wrote on the record.
Yeah, so that you see, there's master denotes the master. Edited means we chop tape with razor blades and edited it, tightened it up, different performances, took sections from different songs.
You blew my mind with that.
Fast
Really
forward.
helped my engineering for the next couple of years, actually.
Full Pro Tools, full
Yeah.
detective. Okay. And then you can see over here, this is the snares we used. I think we had 6 different snares we used. There's Reel 1, the drum and vocal song, cymbal catch. There we go,
Yeah.
Concubine. And there's a Yamaha Black Beauty snare. There's a DW snare. There's the Yamaha. There's a Pearl one here.
Yeah, let's give Carl Plaster some credit.
Carl Pratt, Carl
He's
was
awesome.
your drum
Carl,
tech.
Yeah.
Carl came into my 475 class this week and gave a whole drum tune.
Oh, really?
Taking thing.
Nice.
He's
I haven't
done
seen him
the
for a
same.
while.
He's done a Blue Man group. And if there's the list of all the snares you had. So there's 5 snares: Noble and Cooley, DW Brown, Yamaha Pearl, Sensortone, and a black Yamaha.
Nice.
And there's a number of the old Guitar Center in Boston.
How did you? I want to ask how gear dependent you were. No, starting with the musical instruments, some people, if their guitar goes down, they won't record until they get their guitar back. Other people will make music with whatever's in front of them. Where are you on that continuum?
I'll make music with whatever's in front of me. And I think, like, as Matthew was listing off those snare drums, I think that kind of reminded me of where my head was at the time, which was, I think part of the reason we recorded it at Q with Matthew is that I was a budding recording engineer at the time, and I had never gone to school like you guys are doing, or had an opportunity to intern or assist anybody else. So for me, like, this record, despite I knew that it was ultimately a Converge record and it wasn't for my personal benefit, but I wanted to take advantage of these opportunities to try new pieces of gear and try different drums
You watched
and
me like a hawk. the whole
techniques.
record.
Yeah,
I
it was
did
like,
everything I was doing. What are you doing? What are you doing? Because you knew what you were doing, but you didn't have the confidence yet to do it.
And it wasn't, and that annoys the hell out of me when people do that to me, and I didn't want to I didn't want it to be off-putting, but I was just curious.
No,
you
no,
know?
I have no problem with that.
Yeah, so this
fun.
record was a huge learning experience for me.
Yeah.
Prince was exactly the same way. He wanted to have just one person there with him, and he wanted to know every aspect of it. Not because he was a control freak, because it was his art and it was his music, and he wanted to be able to say knowledgeably, change this or change that, and know what it was he was talking about.
Yeah, you also got to say the Kurt Ballou of 2001 is a little different
Yeah.
than the Kurt Ballou of 2013. Yeah, he was a lot shyer then. He was just, Kurt's, I don't know if you guys know this, Kurt's a bit of a genius. His background is science and developing.
I worked as a biomedical engineer doing endovascular
Yeah,
stent
so
grafts.
he still had that job when we were making the record, and after this record, he was able to quit his job. Which is,
No, I was laid off.
well, laid off, but they gave
Well,
you a nice redundancy package, which you
They
bought gear,
did.
I seem to
Well,
remember.
that's
You
actually
must
a
have been
big
important.
part of the story of this record. Actually, not just my own, professional career ending, but the other guys in the band were going through similar metamorphoses of career changes, living accommodation changes, and so all that stuff put together. We were going to make this record either way, but we were able to become a full-time band right around this time. Right around the time this record came out, we were able to go out and tour and support it and really push it, which is something we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
How did the takes go? I know I've seen you guys live several times. I know that Ben can keep up that level of energy and that accuracy for a long time. But how many takes could you do? And what was your criteria for saying these are the good takes? This is a good performance. What were you listening for?
I don't remember how many takes we did. Ben, I was just blown away by watching Ben. I could sit and watch Ben for days.
Yeah, and he's just gotten better and better too.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just
Well,
play
I
some
mean,
more. I'd love it.
I mean, I met him through recording a couple previous bands of his, so I was like, okay, remember this guy, and that's what happened. Actually, initially, the first show he played with us, we didn't think he was going to be a member of the band because he didn't play double bass yet.
All right.
And then he was able to fake it good enough with a floor tom and all that, and we were like, we'll buy you a double bass pedal, you can join the band. So it was like best thing we ever did because he totally reinvigorated the band. Like prior to when we lost our previous drummer, I was ready to to end the band or to like switch to keyboards and get a drum machine. I had no idea what I was going to do, and then we found Ben and it totally reinvigorated the band. But no, the takes on this record, and I think also with all the other previous records that all the subsequent records I've done, driven by a lot of things. My evaluation of the abilities of the player, and
True that. Yeah.
how what can this person ultimately achieve, and are they achieving their own potential, and if not, can we push them to do better, or do we need to dumb it down so that it still sounds confident and great? But then also, budget, time constraints. Like I said earlier, Ben was going through finals, so it was just like, I got 20 more minutes before I got to go, and so we got to nail the song, and so we would nail the song, and that's
Kurt took control of the. I was in charge of all the technical stuff, so he didn't have to worry about that, so that he could focus on evaluating performances.
Yeah. But there's even a few songs where the song I mentioned to you at lunch, the song "Thaw." We did a take of that and I can't remember if it was A or B of Q.
I think
but
some songs we did in both rooms and see if which one turned out better.
Yeah, we actually, I forgot about that. We did do that. But Thaw, we couldn't get a satisfactory take in Q. And that song had a bit of demo-itis because we had previously recorded that song, so we ended up re-recording that at my studio in Norwood.
So you had to come back. Yeah, sometimes that happens where you say, there's something that's still not quite right about this.
And with regard to takes, usually we would fill up 2 or 3 reels of tape, and then we'd sit down and review, because we knew if we had Ben, we had, okay, we've got 2 hours, let's record as much as we can, and then 4 hours, and then we'd sit down and review, and then
cut it together.
And cut it together if necessary, yeah. Big piles of tape around the room. This is the chorus.
I remember those days.
Choruses.
I think you had
This is
like
section A, this is section
no,
B.
you had them on reels. You would I remember you storing like, okay, here's this drum fill on this like little reel.
It depends how big, yeah.
Yeah.
There'd be lots of reels lying around.
How about the vocals? How many takes was Jake good for? You had mentioned before that style of singing is deceptive. It's not necessarily that loud. It's coming from a place in the voice that's controlled.
The stuff
not
that I'm not sure
necessarily
Kurt's
that
got way
loud.
much, but sometimes it is somebody destroying their throat.
Yeah.
But but the best types is someone that's an affectation almost, and it's really can be not that loud. Jake's wasn't that loud. I don't remember. He just had that kind of amazing squawk to it.
He has his voice has evolved quite a bit over the years. He's a much deeper singer now than he was then, and I think it's partially a result of doing it for so many years and destroying his voice and stuff. But he does tend to expel an entire lung's worth of air on every line that he sings. He goes very hard.
Oh, yeah, he's got his bent
And he always
doubled over, and he's very kind of.
He-
We just gave him a SM7.
Yeah,
if
he
I
always-
remember, and he just
Oh.
holds the SM7,
Yeah.
he's jumping around singing into it.
Yeah, he's. I would love if he would record with a regular like LDC, but he insists on the handheld.
Huh.
And but also, you know, one good thing about it is there's not a great deal of pitch information involved.
No.
So you don't have to worry so much about things being in tune. It's more about whether it's the right
It's the
attitude,
attitude.
whether it has the right degree of edge.
Right.
And what about the mixing? You guys, I know you worked together on that.
It was mixed to Fort Apache on the. It was basically all recorded through Neve equipment, pretty much, and maybe a few API bits and pieces in there. It was mixed on the Neve 8078 at the Fort. Actually, I don't think we did anything special. We just did it. I remember we came back and
We had
remixed
to
a couple
do
of
it.
songs.
We had to do it twice. Well, we actually we had booked time to mix, but I think that we still had a few vocals to record and maybe a couple other overdubs.
I remember there
and
being 2 sessions. That's
we did run out of time. We ran out of time during the first mixing session because we actually didn't have all of the songs ready to be mixed.
Oh.
And then we had to book another session, and I believe at the second session we decided to remix a couple of the songs we had mixed in the first session. That console was quite dark, as I remember, and I think that we decided that we wanted to brighten them up a little bit.
that was before it was tweaked. Yeah, it had a nice Neve veil to it, so you had to really open up
Yeah.
the high end. And I remember,
Veil's
the main thing I remember was when the first time around we had the 1176s. There were 3 1176s at the Fort Apache, and we had them on guitars, and then we took them off for the remixes and put them on the kick and the snare. So
Okay.
brighten up the kick and the snare, and because we decided that the guitars were square waved enough. You know, a distorted guitar is
Yeah.
a square wave. We didn't really need to compress them. Although the 1176 is a bright compressor, so we're using it more to brighten it up a little bit.
Didn't you use a Dynamite also for like the turbo tracks?
Oh, most probably. And everything was mixed through the Dominator, the Studio Dominator. Was our mix.
What's
the
that?
Aphex Studio Dominator,
Well, the Aphex.
which
Yeah,
is
the
a stereo multi-band limiter, which
Mm.
we used. It's the sound of the Bends or any of those kind of records and stuff like that. You know,
I since bought one of those and I haven't really gotten much out of it.
But I stopped using them a while later. At the time, it was because it was such a limiter. It was almost like poor man's automation, because no matter if you push something up too loud, the limiter just stopped it.
Yeah.
So it was good if you were mixing records quickly, because it just kind of gave you a level where you could
Put
just
through
hit
that
it.
thing and it's not going to move.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get the first one before they tried to improve it and ruined it. Like most times that they try and do stuff, the one after it was terrible.
Yeah, but that was all analog mixing. You had a few people on faders, and everyone had their assigned moves. And I remember actually the song "Concubine" that you played. That was mastered off the DAT because we passed the mix. The half-inch had a mix that was less than ideal.
Oh, yeah.
And we actually went back to an earlier
You
mix that we
mastered
had
off
on
the DAT.
just for that one
Just
song.
for that one. Huh.
Yeah.
That's
This was
risky.
DAT. This is when they were DATs.
We were running DATs safeties. I don't know if you ran them like off the repo head of the half-inch.
Every time we were recording, we would record on input, and then we would record from repro, so we had it with direct and from
Oh,
analog.
interesting.
Okay, so you had it. So you had a DAT direct and a DAT from analog.
Output of the console, half-inch tape machine, out of the half-inch tape machine into the DAT.
Okay, from the
When
repro
we're
head.
recording the mix, so that we can mix in real time, we're listening to the half-inch machine and input.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then when we're listening back, we're listening off the repro head, so we're also making a copy off the repro.
So you had your DAT was off of repro and also directly off the
yes,
stereo
we have both
bus.
options. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's
so
interesting.
you can have it with the sound of tape or without the sound of tape.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the additional tape.
But there was just so much hand work that I think that for whatever reason, just one of the earlier mixes ended up being the one.
Yeah, sometimes you blast out a few mixes and you don't realize until later on that you can try too hard. Sometimes.
Yeah.
But then everyone had 8 faders, and at the end of the song, you're like, "Did you get your parts? Did you get your
I
parts?"
remember those days. I remember
Yes.
those,
No. Well, listen to that. Let's check it out.
Is there another song in particular you'd like to talk about? We could do Phoenix in Flames, which is short and is and is awesome.
Is that the drum one?
Yep. Or we could do something a little bit, you know, a little bit longer.
Yeah, that was.
Hildepe is.
Yeah, Phoenix and Flames was weird. I don't want to say there's like 6 drum sets and
Which is the one you had the
no
the,
guitars or drums. Or I
Which is
mean,
the
no
one
guitars or bass.
the one you played theremin on.
The one that I played theremin on?
Yes.
That might have been Distance and Meaning.
I remember you
Wait.
Cut
No, I
playing-
think
playing the theremin in the
theremin. No,
studio.
theremin. There's definitely theremin at the end of Fault and Fracture. Distance and Meaning. I think there was either theremin or the Electrics Filter Factory that I was doing. Which was a remix.
Anything you got a
remix
memory of
projects.
and would like to, or just
Did
seems
you?
particularly
To me,
poignant.
like it wasn't, and I think my perspective on this has changed more as I've gotten older, but it's not so much about the specific song as it is about the body of work, and
yeah.
not even just over the course of one album, but over the course of the history of a band.
True that. Well, let's go more than the bigger picture stuff. Both you and Jake had additional skills in addition to what you do in the band. Yours being as a producer and as an engineer, and now today as a luthier. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's talk about Jake for just a minute. And I can't see that quote. Matthew, can you read that?
We started as a hardcore punk rock band, and we'll end up as a hardcore punk rock band. There's no get-ups, no nonsense, no posing, no playing a character. It's just 4 guys writing songs that are challenging. That's it.
It makes it sound so simple. So Jake was doing your album art as well. And can we show some of these incredible covers?
That's actually Aaron Turner's painting.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that.
That's
That was your
not
first
Jake's
record.
art.
No.
And that
That
is,
was Jake's arm, though.
yeah,
That's the most recent
You
album.
mixed up a couple
All We
letters
Love,
there.
We Leave Behind.
yes.
2012.
And I think you can buy a T-shirt that looks almost just like that at Urban Outfitters.
That was Axe to Fall from 2009.
Yes.
Stunning, stunning, stunning.
That's another Aaron Turner painting.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
That's a Jake work. That's a little bit of a departure in our visual style. Matthew mixed that one.
Yes, I remember we had power cuts the whole time.
Oh, that was awful. That happened to me again a couple of years ago.
So that explains why the different styles. I guess I got wrong information because the information I had was that he did all your covers.
He's a visual artist, but he's also a graphic designer. So those previous records, the artwork was done by a different person, but then the layout of the record was done by Jake.
Okay. Was he doing this artwork while you were making the record? He had a
Not in
concept?
our presence.
Well, I remember him on the computer doing all the edges and stuff in the studio. So, he just got his first MacBook laptop.
Oh, okay.
I seem to remember.
How do you guys write
I
together?
think-
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that, like, when it comes to composing music, Jake's pretty hands-off with the other 3 guys in the band, and we're the same with him when it comes to artwork. You know, we have a lot of faith in his ability as an artist, and there's not a lot of back and forth with regards to the art. Usually, he just nails it. He does great stuff, and every once in a while, we'll have some little comment for him. But in general, you know, he's working on his own, doing that stuff. And he gives us the same. He has the same confidence in us when we're writing music.
How do you guys write? Does he come to you with lyrics ever, or do you take an instrumental track to him?
We take instrumental tracks to him. I wish that he would make more lyrical type suggestions to us, like saying, I have this basic structure, and what if the music did this and this, or making this change to the music would be better for the vocals, and here's why. His brain doesn't really work that way. He likes to fit lyrics to already composed music. But what we've started doing more frequently over the years is just kind of imagining what vocals would do in a song, or what Jake might do in a song. And I try to write, I try to compose music, or mostly song structures around my idea of, where would vocals be placed? Not specifically what's the rhythm or what's the the melody or the
But you're
lack thereof.
familiar with his style and what he's likely to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm also I try to be very conscious of what's the voice in the song at any given moment, whether that be a vocal or a drum part or a bass part or a lead guitar or something like that, and make sure that there's always a focus at any given time in the song, and to not have sections of the song where a guitar would be the voice where a vocal would naturally go as well, and
Yeah.
try to have a lot of interplay between the different voices within
You're
the song.
a perfect team in that way. If you were stepping all over each other, the records wouldn't be as highly regarded as they are. So you definitely are a perfect complementary team, and I'm sure it's just getting better and better with each project
Well,
you
yeah,
do.
just from me being a student, they have, you can tell there's respect for each other in the members of the band, and they do. Kurt and Jake especially, to me, there's almost like they were, I'm not sure, they're like almost like a brotherly kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're a family, you know, with all the ups and downs that come along with that, for sure.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. One of your accomplishments, as I mentioned earlier, was keeping a band together. Band dynamics. I've never been a member of one, but I've observed plenty of them. I know that it's really complicated. It's really hard. You have to know when to leave, and you have to know when to stay. And if you decide to stay, you have to know how to stay, and that's got to be difficult. So we had talked about Jake's other career, but then there's yours as well. You are now an accomplished producer and engineer, and you're doing a lot for other bands. Can you talk about your career as a producer and as an engineer?
Sure.
What you like to do? What kind of art are you making now, not just for yourself, but for other people, and what that feels like to do?
Oh, it's awesome to. Well, really, what I've always wanted to do with my life was not specifically, you know, music or any one pursuit, as it is just the idea of always being creative and having an opportunity to tinker with things. And you know, in my previous career, when I was a biomedical engineer, I got to like play around with CAD software all day and design medical devices and test fixtures and stuff like that. And then when I was building my current studio, I got to do acoustical treatments and put up walls, and you know, anything that I can do where I can be creative and then take something that's an idea in my head at the beginning of the day, and then at the end of the day look and, you know, I have this song, or I have this meal, or I have this, you know, gobo that I built, or you know, whatever it happens to be. Like having an opportunity to continue to be creative and use my mind to create real things, tangible things, is really important to me.
Making things. You've got an engineering mind that is methodical, and that is rooted in, sounds like, physics and logic and
Yeah.
and reality. People with engineering minds are good at the minutia and at the details, but you also have an artistic mind. You're very visionary, and most engineers just take other people's visions and then they build what other people have invented. But you are one of those rare minds that's both. You're
Well,
a visionary and a writer and author as well as...
The whole band, they're all smart.
I'm sure, yeah.
You can have a good, decent conversation. It's not
Well,
like, you know, it's always kind of interesting hanging out with them.
Yeah.
Helps to
I mean,
grow.
Converge is my outlet for that, and to a certain extent, recording other bands is practice for Converge.
Ah,
not that they're all like guinea pigs for me, but and you know, maybe early on they definitely were, and but it's part of the same thing though. It's like if I'm not being super creative on my own art, being in a room with other creative people and helping them to pursue their art is inspirational to me and rewarding to me, and you know, I enjoy that
Beats a
sort
day
of.
job.
It definitely beats a day job. This, I guess, you know, and I like feeling like I can. Well, I like okay. So in the punk rock world, we sort of feel like we have this little community in and of ourselves, and I like the idea of that being a closed economy, and knowing that, like, you know, if I need a lawyer for something, I've got to. You know, my lawyer used to play in Shelter, and you know, and my booking agent used to be our roadie, and my other booking agent in Europe used to be in a band that we toured with, and like, you know, and if I need some masonry work done, I can call this guy, or you know, whatever. There's like a group of friends within the same community that can, you know, spend their money and pool their resources, and I feel as though, you know, as a recording studio, I provide a service to my community that I can, you know, help out the members within my community. And Jake's the same way with his graphic arts, his artwork, and his record label. You know, it's just there's a natural division of labor that I think happens with people like us, where over time we fall into these roles where together we form a community.
collaborative work is so important, as long as you're working with people who have different skills from you, and that it's all moving toward one target. We talked about this a little bit earlier at lunch, but I want to ask you a little bit more about it. So you're expressing yourself artistically through your own music and through other people's, and Converge is just one aspect of the music of your life, and music is just one aspect of your life as a whole. I know that you're working now with bands whose art is similar to your own, because we had talked about earlier having the same frame of reference. You guys know the same albums, you know the same bands, you know the same aesthetic, you know the history of it. What would you like to do artistically that you haven't done? What are you curious about? And what other music is there in your life that you'd like to explore and get to know and maybe try your hand at?
Well, sure. I would certainly love to branch out into other musical genres. I'm certainly best known as someone who records bands that are, within the sort of same umbrella that Converge is, and most of the bands I've recorded that are from outside that contain members who are from that community. But that being said, given the choice between recording like a shitty band from some other genre that I don't like and a really good band in a genre that maybe I've spent too much time in, I'd prefer to go with the good band.
The better band.
But yeah, like I'd love, I think I'm not sure how to make those opportunities for myself. But I'm usually like more excited to record something that's a little bit off the beaten path for me. Like I did a record a few months ago from a band called Beast Milk. Their record came out this week, and it's a pretty phenomenal album, and it's maybe a similar mood to Converge, but sonically it's coming from a really different space. And something like that I'm actually more excited about recording than something that's a little more typical for me.
As an engineer,
because everybody gets bored of their job no matter how great their job is.
True that. Matthew and I were talking about that just the other day, how we don't always get asked to engineer or even produce the records that are in the style that we're most familiar with. But sometimes if you take your style and you add it to a different style of music, you fan the whole thing out a little bit and make the whole thing fatter. My background being in soul music, and I was always asked to work on indie rock records for the most part, but I would bring a soul sensibility to the sounds and to the feel. So I assume if you do work on other styles of music, you're going to bring your sensibility to it and make that stronger.
If a band is looking for something a little more aggressive, they'll come to me even though I'm outside of their normal comfort zone.
God, it'd be so fun to work with you.
When you made this record,
Yeah, exactly.
it was,
that was the
it
case.
was something I hadn't done before,
Yeah.
but I applied what I'd learned to this, and as you can see, it was a good result.
There's actually even a few bands that I have specific knowledge that they've specifically not recorded with me because I seem like too logical of a choice for them.
Yeah, see, there's that too. It's too perfect, and they want that.
But I
fleshing
I
out
respect that.
experience.
I respect the fact that that band is trying to do something, outside of their comfort zone and outside of their listeners' comfort zone,
And they've
that
thought
will set
about
them
it.
apart more.
Yeah.
And on the reverse of that, after this record, I had lots of Converge wannabe bands.
Well, that always happens. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I didn't make records with them.
You get like an into a certain scene, and then the floodgates open up.
You got to be careful that you can't do. If you're doing the best, you can't do the ones below. You got to be careful.
After I did Bare Naked Ladies, one record label, Warner Reprise, put me together with Lou Reed, because those two bands go together. I didn't work with Lou Reed, but it was one hell of a dinner conversation. God, that was great. Okay, so I still have so many other things to ask you. I want to talk about the fan experience a little bit. I want to talk about, there's one thing to make a record. There's one thing to perform on stage. But a record doesn't always sound like what it felt like to do it. And these are more difficult because they're more nuanced questions to ask and to answer. But can you talk a little bit about, not as well as these guys can, but can you talk a little bit about what a Converge fan gets from the work you do? When you put it out there, what do they get? What's it for?
Well, I guess what I would say is that all music or all art is created for an audience, and who that audience is could be the fans at the shows, or maybe the audience is people who score films or sound designers. Or maybe the audience, in the case of Converge, I think the audience was ourselves. And we made a record to make ourselves happy. We made a record that it was the record that we wanted to make, and we didn't really. You got to understand, like in 2001, there was no possibility of a career in metallic hardcore. It just didn't exist.
Wow.
There wasn't. It was such a smaller scene that the idea that we could earn a living playing music was ridiculous. So this was just something that we were doing to express ourselves, and we made the record that we wanted to make, and I think we feel very happy and fortunate that enough people enjoyed the record that we've been able to continue to make records.
We talked a little bit about, I would like you to address this particular audience. This is Berkeley, and these people are paying an awful lot of money, and they're taking a big gamble to get a formal education in music. They know that you can be successful without one. They know that whether it's as an engineer, a producer, a sound designer, a guitar player, or an artist. You don't absolutely have to go to college to achieve your dreams, but college can help. What can you comment on regarding that? Can you talk about what you think the value of a formal musical education is to the world of music? What does it strengthen, and can it potentially weaken something?
Well, it's a bit difficult to separate the education itself from, you know, the personality type that pursues that education. You know, to take like, because you'll never be able to like just take Jimmy and know what Jimmy would be with or without school, but you know, you can take this overall demographic and this demographic and compare them, but maybe it's something that happened much earlier in life, or something genetically that makes them different. I mean, I think that you guys being here are certainly a cut above the majority of recording students. You know, this is like a really serious, demanding recording program. There's others that are much less selective of their students, and others that are, you know, more like certificate type programs. You know, I know that when I was 18 and going to college, I didn't care about a career. It was more about that I wasn't ready to be an adult, and you know, the idea of like, you know, of delaying adulthood for another 4 years was really important to me. So I can see people, or I have seen people with an interest in music, think like, well, you know what, I'm never going to be a rock star. Maybe I can work with them. And I've seen people go down the recording path, not out of a love of recording, but out of a need to delay adulthood. And that's true with any career path, not just recording, and or also, you know, music performance as well. But that being said, recording school drummers is awesome, and they're always way better than like drummers that have maybe learned by rote.
Some of these guys here are so good. These kids here at Berklee can play. They can play. I mean, coming from the outside world and coming here, that's one thing, there's no doubt.
Just don't lose your individuality. Don't lose
Well,
that thing
yeah,
that makes
that's.
you special.
But the thing, okay,
Don't
so the
turn
thing
out
about
that kind of homogeneity.
that there is that danger, but then there's also the advantage of vocabulary. You know, the more tools you have at your disposal, whether it be you know, techniques or you know styles that you can play in, or whether, you know, it might be recording techniques or versatility. But you know, these things are all tools, but at the same time, your life experience is a tool for songwriting too. And if being in school limits life experience, that's a detriment. But if you can improve your musical vocabulary, then you'll be better able to communicate. But that being said, the average listener has a difficult time. Well, yeah, I'm sure you guys have had conversations with people at some point who are put off by you using big words, because a lot of people just aren't that smart. You know, so like the mass music buying public, they need stuff that's pretty dumb. And I think in a lot of cases, educated musicians are too intelligent to sell records. You know, like, you can't dumb yourselves down to playing this like super simple music. You know, and that's why we have Dream Theater.
Art music
Sing
is.
the chorus, and that's sort of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm over the years, as I've gotten older, I've just been pushing more for choruses, like, and I feel like that's the main shortcoming of Jane Doe. I feel like I've become much more economical in my songwriting over the years, and more.
It's like OK Computer. There's no choruses in the whole thing.
Yeah, well, we used to have you know, we used to have this kind of like what I would call like railroad car style song arrangements, where like, you know, where the typical arrangement would be like, you know, A, B, C, B, B, or something like that. You know, like the early Converge stuff is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P. You know, or the idea that like, you know, every idea that you have to use in a song. And, you know, as I got more mature as a songwriter, I, you know, learned to pick, you know, my best ideas and try to use my best ideas in songs. And I think that you guys have the advantage here that you have some people that can help guide you in that direction. And, you know, in learning it all on my own, I was much slower to develop my songwriting instincts, and also, in my engineering abilities. Everything I developed a lot slower because I learned it on my own, and reading the internet and sorting through the signal to noise on recording message boards and whatnot. I have the advantage that the fact that I had to learn it on my own, I developed my own style, but I also I certainly don't have the same depth of experience that Matthew has. And
Well, I can't play the guitar like you either.
well, there's certainly ups and downs for either one. I guess for me, the most important is not whether you're educated or not, but whether you're maximizing the tools that you have at your disposal and using all of your vocabulary and using it to be creative, and just having a positive, productive, fulfilling musical experience with whatever that happens to be available to you.
And if you can sell records, so much the better.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly not the most important thing, but selling records can help enable you to continue to make records. And for me, that's always been the goal, is to be able to, this, like Jane Doe is not a destination. Jane Doe is a step on a journey. And
Well, Jane Doe got you your major label deal. Essentially, the next one was.
Well, Epitaph, they're independent, but well, they don't function like a major label. I can tell you that. They're all punk people that just enable us to do what we do. I mean, there's certainly some, stuff on the label that I don't love, but
No, but they have more funds.
they do. Well, they
Vision.
shortly before this, they had like the Offspring and Rancid, and they put out. Well, I think that Offspring record, which I can't stand, but it was one of the biggest selling independent records of all time.
Yeah, it's
and
like
that
10 million now. Wasn't it?
yeah, something like that. And that helped provide some funds and enabled us to make records after that. But we know all those we've recouped on all of our subsequent albums. So
It's a big statement. To recoup, and it's great. I mean, your budgets were at that time were $10,000, $11,000. I've done records for that kind of money, and I don't know if you guys know, but in the 80s and in the 90s, the average budget was $130,000. I mean, that's 80 to 130 grand.
If you're a starting out band, it was 80.
You'd have 80, 85. And my manager would say to me, the budget's really low. We've got 90 grand. I'm sorry. See if you can do it for 90 grand. It's a big accomplishment.
well, you were working in a different way back then.
Yeah.
I have my own studio now, so my overhead is lower than that stuff. I don't have assistants. I don't have interns. I don't have, I don't hire drum techs often. I don't have on-staff technical people. It's just me. I clean the toilets and I make the records and I do all that stuff. And so I can make records a little bit more economically. But also, I think for bands that are smart and they, as long as they keep their overhead low, it's possible to go out there and not lose money.
Yeah.
We don't have like a ton of roadies or lighting guys or
Seen you on stage,
managers
I
or
know.
anything like that. Like we carry our own gear, we tour manage ourselves and make our own records and design our own records and everything's it's a pretty internal process. And I think that
Cottage industry.
yeah, well, part of that is just out of necessity. And when we were starting, that was absolutely necessary because nobody cared about metallic hardcore, and if we wanted to get anything done, we had to do it ourselves. But I think we've continued to do it that way, and the more that you can do yourself for your music, the more ownership you take over that music. Because it's more a part. When you write all your own songs, you record your own records, you design your own records, you put out your own records, you drive yourself on tour. All that stuff contributes to the ownership that you take over your music, and the more of that you can do, the more rewarding the whole process will be.
Now, in so doing, you inadvertently, in 2001, you probably didn't know that this is coming, but the way that you made that record then and the career you have today is now the model for success. I mean, that's how it's done. Their generation, the odds of these guys getting a record deal is so greatly reduced that success looks like to them what you've done, by and large. So you've paved the way as pioneers to how art making, record making, having a career in the arts, how that can actually work.
Well, I should say that our success has been the fact that we've been able to continue to make records, but we're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. And
that's
like,
how it goes.
and I think I'm noticing now, like I'm almost 40, and a lot of my peers are, they're at that age where, They've been playing in bands and touring for 20 years or so, and they're still living paycheck to paycheck. And now they're like about to be 40 and realize that, oh shit, like I want to have a life. I don't want to be worried. I want to have health insurance, and I don't want to be worried about paying the rent every month and stuff. So it's definitely like a tough career path, and it's one that, I know a lot of people that are able to maintain it while they're doing it, but it's a very hard way to build a life, at least as a performer. Taking a step behind the scenes, as I have done, enables me a little bit more job and life security.
You can live the
So
life
recording
you
is
want.
good, playing is bad.
Can-
Both is best,
you
or multiple income streams is best.
that is
That's what you need nowadays.
Yeah.
royalties
From
is
your
good.
Salem mansion.
Ah.
We've been talking about an album, and you're talking about albums that you've made in addition to this. The whole topic on the table is album making. That is kind of an archaic concept these days. Can you talk about what you consider to be the value of an album versus just singles? Do you value albums?
Absolutely. I mean, but it's. I think all musical experience has to do with. There's a certain sentimentality to it, and it's greatly affected by the way in which you first experience music and first latch on to something. And when I first started experiencing music, when I was 9 or 10, I bought tapes, and they were full albums, and some of them had liner notes, and I would invest myself in those tapes, and I would read them cover to cover. I'd read all the lyrics, and I'd read all the thanks list, and pick out the bands that were on different metal bands' thanks lists, and then go find those bands, and then do the same. And that's how I experienced music. So the idea of an album is still really important to me, and I think.
This is still pre-iTunes and all kind of
Yeah.
stuff like that. So in those days, you bought a record, you listened to it, you sat down,
Yeah.
and you looked at your stereo and listened to it
Yeah.
for 45 minutes.
But that actually, that way to listen to music only really existed briefly in the overall time period. Prior, the earlier instances of recorded music, were singles, and 78 singles even, and then the concept of album was really because when someone put out an album, it was in like a photo album style book with a collection of 78s that formed an album.
That's right.
So there was a focus originally on singles, and that's really where the focus is now. And I think from a creative standpoint, it's certainly a lot easier to focus on a smaller batch of songs than on an album. I noticed a lot of the albums that I've worked on, there's maybe 12 songs in the album, and there's a few songs that just kind of fall by the wayside when it comes to the amount of attention they get. The record I'm working on right now with my friends in this band Nice Hooves that are here, we're recording 5 songs, and that's like a much more manageable
That's what
chunk
I
of
was going
songs
to
to
say.
work
I
on.
find myself recording batches of 5 or 6 songs now, more kind of EP
Yeah.
kind of stuff, or half an album and then half an album.
Yeah,
It's a different experience for the listener, though. It's not
it
the same.
is, and it's tough to make.
Attention spans on this thing. You see.
Well, yeah, but attention spans are really short right now. We have so much media interface at all times that it's hard to focus on anything for too long. And when I'm making albums, I really try to pack enough diversity into the album that it will hold the listener's attention over the course of the whole record, but also not pull you in too many different directions. Like if you were going to listen to Jane Doe and all of a sudden there was some, pretty pop song in the middle of it, it would be off-putting. Because Jane Doe really does put you in a certain kind of mood, and if something deep, like I can't listen to like Mr. Bungle or something. It's just, it pulls me in too many different directions. I mean, they're a super talented band or whatever, but it's just like, it's too many different moods, and there's no cohesiveness to it for me. So I like to make a record that would actually hold someone's attention for 30, 40, 50 minutes.
Takes you on a little tour de force. a little bit.
Takes you on a journey, but it's more like, yeah, it's like a tour of Rome rather than a tour of all of Europe.
It's a nice segue into my next question. I've got 2 more questions, and I would like to open it to the floor. But that segues into, let me read this. There's a researcher, his name is Adrian North. He's out of Australia. Social psychologist in music perception and cognition. He discovered a very high degree of similarity between the personality profiles of classical and heavy metal music fans. So he did personality profiles of people who like certain genres of music, and then he asked them, what's your personality? They did all these tests. What kind of music do you listen to? And he found that the personality profile of people who listen to classical music is almost identical to the people who listen to heavy metal and hardcore music. Personality-wise, they're the same. In fact, the only main difference between these two populations was their age. Older folks listening to classical, so that means all of you, all of us, will be listening to classical probably when we get older. But come on, give it a try. But when you're younger, that personality gravitates toward heavy music. The reason both these populations are somewhat similar is that they're willing to work. They'll do the work, the cognitive work, to enjoy something. They'll listen to classical music, which has long 8-minute themes, before you get around to the lead line again. It's real work on your auditory memory. And they'll listen to music that has very complex structure. It's hard to memorize. I'm amazed at my former students who turned me on to your music and how they would play air guitar to your albums, and they know every break, they know every part. That's a lot of work in auditory memory. You had mentioned something a bit earlier about how when you work for something, you love it more. You value it more. You've invested time.
Yeah.
So would you care to comment on that?
I think that's what you just said is true as a creator of music, but also as a listener of music. When you, let's face it, this is pretty abrasive music. It's just not for everyone, and it requires a certain investment, not only in the individual album, but in the overall genre before you really understand what it is. And then once you have put that time into it, then it feels like it's your own, and you get more out of it because you feel as though like you're part of this little smaller world, this community. There's an exclusivity about it. And also to mention earlier about the classical to metal comparisons, I think that maybe not as much in a band like Converge, which is very, I think, more on like the punk hardcore side of the metal world, but in general, I think metal and classical both require a lot of imagination.
Interesting.
It's very cinematic in nature, and it's something that can take you on a journey to a lot of different places. Whereas like pop music is very like single layered type music, whereas metal and classical are multi-layered. You can hear it in a lot of different ways, and you can hear new things in it each time you listen to it.
It launches you. It's not a naturalistic record so much that you picture yourself there while the band's playing it, although you can picture yourself, but it launches imagination. And Jane Doe is a case in point, and Converge's music in general. The lyrics are, to me, pretty unintelligible, and on this record anyway, you haven't included them.
They're in there, but
segments
obscured.
of them, yes, the
Yeah.
segments of them. So you can't just follow along with the lyrics. So that means your listener has to say to him or herself, this is my music. It means what I think it means. And that does kind of help the bonding a little bit.
I used to call it music to upset parents. The kind of music your parents go, what the hell is that? What are you listening to? And I was like, if they do that, then I've done a good job.
Yeah.
Prince used to say, as an artist, you're really in trouble when people's moms start coming to your show. He said he was going to retire. He says, the first time somebody's mom comes up to me and goes, that was delightful. You just made my evening. Thank you so much. He goes, I'm done. I had a really nice time.
Sure, there's a lot of moms now.
Yeah, grandma's probably. So now the last question before we turn it over, I want to talk to you, ask you to talk about your luthier career. You're making guitars now. What got you into that? What kind of guitars are you making?
I wouldn't say that I really have a career at this point.
Your hobby?
But no, I mean, like I have an interest in like I said earlier, creating physical things and creating, having a taking an idea and turning it into reality. And I've built about 30 guitars for my friends in my basement, and my dad's a machinist, so I have access to CNC machine shop type stuff. So I've made some guitars for my friends, and but I'm not a luthier. A luthier can do amazing handcrafted things. I have a background in engineering, so I can use SolidWorks, which is like a CAD drafting package, and design a guitar in virtual space, and then give it to a CNC milling machine expert, and he can then turn my design into machine code that mills out wood. And then I spray some paint on it and slap it together and set it up.
Where
So
do
I'm
you
not
get
really
the
a
what about,
luthier.
where do you, oh, I see. But
But-
what about the pickups and the hardware and stuff?
I mean, that stuff is all third-party stuff. I built pick guards and bridges, but I've yet to try winding a pickup. I think I'm more interested in the engineering and like the white collar side of guitar building than I am in being a craftsman. I've done
I
it,
see.
but I'm not super interested in continuing to do it because it's a lot of work and it's sort of distracting of my recording
I see.
career, which is my focus. But I am working towards partnering with someone who can do the physical side of it, to take my designs and turn them into real guitars.
And make them for sale, then,
Yeah.
commercially for sale.
Yeah, at this point, I'm like some people I know. I'm very hesitant to hype things before they
Right.
really exist,
Got it.
and these don't really exist yet.
Okay. So, it might
so-
exist.
yeah,
The-
coming
the
soon. Might
Blues
exist
signature
someday.
series of
Yeah.
guitars.
It'll be called God City Instruments.
God's the instrument.
And I've also built a bunch of snare drums too. And
Oh, that would be interesting.
Tony, do you like my snare drum?
Great.
Yeah.
Wooden?
Thumbs up.
No.
Wooden? Multiply?
Titanium.
Oh, titanium. Why titanium?
So again, as an engineer, not a craftsman, it's way easier to work in metal because metal is reliable.
Huh.
You know what it's going to do. Wood is living and moving and breathing, and it's
True.
hard, it's less predictable. So, like building titanium snare drums, despite the fact that it's kind of cost prohibitive, is actually kind of easy. So
How do they sound?
awesome.
It's good.
Very bright and loud, and a lot of wood drums, especially. I notice that they have. There's a certain dynamic range, and when you hit them really lightly, there's not a whole lot of tone, and then you get to a certain point where you're hitting harder and harder and harder, but all that's doing is choking the drum, and you hit a volume ceiling, in which doesn't matter how much harder you hit, you're not going to get any more volume out of the drum. The titanium drums seem to have a wider dynamic range in both directions.
More responsive.
Yeah.
I know the little piccolos sound good when they're played softly, so yeah, that makes sense to me.
Most of the ones I've built have been about 7 by 14.
Oh.
I made 7 snares so far. Yeah. they're
Cut
cool.
through those walls of guitars.
Oh yeah, exactly.
All right, gentlemen and ladies, questions for you.
Who is, or rather, was it a stylistic thing or was it a practical thing to put so much distortion on Jacob's voice? Because you said
Most of the distortion was put on after the fact.
He's like a pod, right?
Well, a lot of the stuff we just plugged out of the tape machine output into the mic pre of the console.
Really?
okay.
Yeah. And just had it down real low.
Love
and
that
the fader was
sound.
like down here.
Love
and
that
the
sound.
thing was wide open. Not so much the pod, because the pod's a little noticeable. We did use the pod in a few of the cleaner guitar sounds, so I remember anything else with it.
I thought you did some vocals. Oh no, maybe you did. No, I think you did distorted drums through the pod.
Yeah, must be. I mostly distorted the drums through a pod, yeah.
Yeah.
The X microphone on track 1
Yeah.
would have been distorted drums, yes. But, yeah, so,
Would
Yeah, because you like to
show
put
us-
unimportant things on edge tracks, right?
of course, yes.
Can we see the track sheets? You brought
Sure.
track sheets for us.
Yeah, if I'm going to distort something, I tend to record it clean and then distort it, so that way I can try different things out. If I distort it when I record it, then I'm stuck with that sound. If I want, because things might change.
There's also a lot of different philosophies when it comes to how a singer's monitoring their voice. You know, if they're heavily distorted, they're not. What's coming back through their headphones is, the dynamic range is way compressed versus what they're putting into it. So they're less able to judge their performance when something's coming back to them distorted. Although that being said, sometimes like distortion or reverb can give somebody more confidence.
Rivers Cuomo from Weezer used to, like, his headphones so distorted you couldn't hear any pitch at all. So when he was singing, he wasn't thinking about pitch, he was just thinking about performing.
Huh,
And
interesting.
then it worked pretty well for him. Yeah, this is Bitter, which became what? Is that
Bitter.
Bitter
This is
Nelson?
Bitter and then some, yeah.
So,
So that had a real title.
yeah, so there's my handwriting and there's Kurt's handwriting, so we can tell who did what. This was done in the small room because Bowden was our assistant in the small room. Plus
Yeah.
6, it was BASF 900 tape.
Mm.
This is the 7th of March, 2001.
At 30 ups, you guys were living large. You
Oh,
could
of
go
course,
to
of course.
30 ups.
So if you're looking at the drums, we
It's
started
better
off
for splicing.
original. We did 14 tracks of drums, and then as we were adding stuff, we were erasing drum tracks, the ones we didn't want. So the MS room there was another there was
The
another.
PZM
There was another room mic, stereo room mic there, which you went over with the bass. X is a distorted microphone, which I put kind of kick drums here. It's kind of right between the drummer's legs, and just put it on Omni and distort the crap out of it, and you can blend it in, and it sounds awesome. Or I can take everything out and drop it down to that, so I can go from a mono to a stereo situation. So it's a good scene change. You know, if you like.
Nice.
Yeah.
Toms obviously straightforward. Kick and the snare. Nowadays, I would mostly, with Pro Tools, we tend to split them up: inside, outside, sub kicks, top bottoms. When we were recording to tape, we've got 24 tracks, so we had to commit. So we just recorded them together like we used to.
Yeah.
So much easier to deal with later on. Overheads. The reason I start with the kick on track 5 and 6, 7, 8 was because when I sat in the middle of the console, that's how far my arm reaches.
I used to
Track
do that too.
So I can turn up the kick and the snare from the major listening musician. The edge tracks, 1 and 2, 23 and 24. If your tape's going to get destroyed in some way, those are the tracks that are going to get destroyed first. So you always tend to leave those for the least important things. When you're recording with analog tape, you're always going to leave a couple of tracks open so you can move things around, bounce stuff around. Now, we might record 5 or 6 tracks of vocals and then comp to another track and then erase them and then move that around. So you always got to leave some tracks open so that you can move things around on the tape to make them work. Because you can't bounce on tape machines to adjacent tracks. So if I'm on track 15, I can't
feedback.
go 16 or 14. I've got to bounce to something further away because otherwise you get feedback. So when you're recording to analog tape, you just have to think about the order in which you're doing things a little bit more. It's not like Pro Tools. Oh, you want another 10 track? Sure, here you go. Boom.
When I was recording, like my Studer wasn't so hot at punching in, so when I was recording the guitar tracks, I think I had like 3 tracks available for myself, so I could have 2 tracks to do my primary thing, and then I would, I'd cut between them for the punch-ins after the fact.
Make a best of it.
Yeah. And I also remembering now, like when you're talking about the X mic, the record's quite mono actually with regards to panning.
The guitars the overheads are going to be hard right. The guitars are going to be hard left and hard right.
They weren't though. That's why. Because when I hear this record, all I hear is S1, which we added in mastering because I wanted the guitars panned wider, and they weren't. I remember you hadn't hard panned the guitars.
I'm pretty certain I did, to be honest.
All right. Well,
There's 2 guitars, then they're hard panned, hard left and hard right.
I'm gonna have to find a DAT and figure it out.
Yeah. I don't know.
Actually, I have the half-inch too.
Yeah, I would. That's what I would do. You want to see on different. So this is what's it? There's 23 tracks of audio on here.
Yeah.
The RCA microphone is a mono microphone in front of the drum kit, maybe 6 feet back, in line with the top of the kick drum, so it kind of gives the kick drum a little bit more 3D-ness. It's just a room mic. I'm not sure if you can use the room mics that much. Maybe on the slower songs.
Yeah.
Rhythm guitars, yes. Cue guitar was the original tracking guitar.
Yeah.
And some vocals. Let's see what else we have here. What other ones do we have? Broken Vow. This one we used double 24. This was done in the big room because it's Fred as the assistant.
Yeah,
So-
essentially the same layout. I think it looks like we kept some more room mics, had the bass on different tracks in this one.
Yeah, we didn't redo the bass on this one. Maybe.
Were you guys, when you made this record, were you restricted to the times of day that you could work? Were you so loud that it was bleeding into James Taylor or other people?
I
or
didn't have any
you
problem
were-
with that.
No problem.
They're soundproof rooms.
Okay.
When the overdubs we did at my studio that I had at the time, I couldn't work until about 5 or 6 at night.
Okay.
So that
What
was
was
a
that
little
studio? I
restricted.
just
It was in
spent there at night, and I never knew where the hell we were.
Norwood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was like an industrial park in Norwood. Oh, just one more thing about the distorted vocals before I forget. Where Jake is doing everything handheld, like it's very sensitive to positioning. So like, if he's like this for like one line and then he's like that for the punch in, the tone is very different. It's a lot less forgiving than like a large diaphragm condenser. And the distortion would help to even out the differences between the punch-ins.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it just kind of smooths around the
Yeah.
I had heard a story about Jim Morrison from The Doors, that he moved his head around so much that the engineer gave him a football helmet, with the mouth guard here, and they took a SM57 and they just stuck it in the guard thing from the football helmet. So he did all his vocals with this football helmet. He must have looked like a bobblehead doll. Anyway, it's his story.
So yeah, there's nothing. Like I say, it's all getting the right